Welcome to tonight's talk titled Confronting Hate in a Divisive Era. I am Melanie Macchio, the director of 92nd Street Y's Continuing Education Program. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the 92nd Street Y is a nonprofit cultural institution located on New York City's Upper East Side. And amongst our team, we host a wide array of programs, performances, and a diversity of classes throughout the year. At this critical time in history, 92Y strives to bring you all timely and analytical programs that keep you informed and engaged. And I can assure you tonight's will be no different given our outstanding panel. We've brought these leaders together this evening in celebration of the work of the late Rabbi Mark Tenenbaum and in honor of the recently released book, Confronting Hate, the untold story of the rabbi who stood up for human rights, racial justice, and religious reconciliation. I encourage you to learn more. Incredibly, this book has become even more timely since its release. We will be providing a link to purchase the book and learn more in the chat for this program for ease of access. Also, a quick note about the program. We will open with a panel discussion amongst our speakers. However, we encourage you to submit questions throughout the program via chat. We'll leave time at the end for you to respond for those responses. You can send your questions directly to Shannon at 92Y, and she'll make sure that they are passed along. With that, I want to welcome our moderator for this evening, 92Y's Rabbi Peter J. Rubenstein. Rabbi Rubenstein brings decades of experience as a congregational rabbi. Excuse me, that was almost a slip of the tongue. And as a leader in the Jewish and interfaith communities. He served as a senior rabbi of Central Synagogue for 23 years, is the immediate past chair of the Partnership of Faith in New York City, and was co-president of the U.S. board of the Tony Blair Foundation. In his role at 92Y as director of Jewish community in the Bronfman Center for Jewish Life, he oversees Jewish content and programming and continues to forge new collaborations with faith leaders both within and beyond the Jewish community, just as he has done this evening. Welcome, Rabbi.
Melanie, thank you. And welcome and good evening to all of you who have become part of this conversation. And I hope that through your questions, you do become part of the conversation. Permit me to express the joy of having three incredibly remarkable people, each of whom has been courageous and visionary and making part of their life work a response to the challenge of this evening's subject, confronting hate in a divisive era. So let me introduce them with just a brief glimpse into what each of them does in that regard. Firstly, Dr. Georgette Bennett is founder and president of the Tenenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding, which she established to build the work of her late husband, Rabbi Mark H. Tenenbaum. She also founded the Multi-Faith Alliance for Syrian Refugees in 2013. And I would add, as an important sidelight, that she will be honored at this year's WISE Online Extraordinary Women's Award event on November 10th. And then the Reverend, that's not a slip of the tongue, I would like her to be a rabbi. The Reverend Dr. Catherine Rose Henderson is president of Auburn Seminary, the board of which I chaired for a number of years. Auburn is a leadership development and research institute that convenes leaders across the multi-faith movement for justice. And lastly, the extraordinary Daisy Khan is the founder of Women's Islamic Initiative in Spirituality and Equality, which amplifies women's voices at all levels of political, economic, religious, and social discourse. Thank you all for joining me. Georgette, let me begin with you. The book Confronting Hate, which has just been indicated, is an amazing biography of an amazing man to whom you were married for 10 years before he died in 1992. Mark Tenenbaum, who I knew when I was a young rabbi, was an untiring, brilliant, and sensitive warrior against hate in so many arenas, among others being civil rights, Soviet Jewry, the Vietnam War, and of course, as a most significant participant in Vatican II and the discussions leading to the issuance of Nostra Aetate, a landmark document repudiating the Vatican's anti-Semitism and the charge that Jews were collectively guilty for the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So my question, Georgette, to you, in your mind, what made Mark exceptional? And what would you perceive as among his greatest strengths? Georgette,
You're muted. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your kind words about Mark, Peter. I very much appreciate them. I would say that first and foremost, he understood that dogmatic beliefs can separate us, but shared values can bring us together. So Mark's take on Judaism was as a universalist, not a particularist, and that means being outward facing, not insular. But he wasn't just a well-intentioned do-gooder. He was strategic and pragmatic, and the techniques that Mark used are completely relevant today, even though he has now been dead for 29 years. He moved beyond dialogue to activism, and he formed multi-faith coalitions to address key issues. He called out bigotry, but without accusing people of being bigots. And when seeming bigotry had occurred, he used it as an opportunity to teach and build bridges. He called out the politics of purity that cause us to view the other as evil rather than as someone who simply holds a different point of view. He knew how to mobilize the moral authority of clergy, and he challenged politicians' claims of piety if they behaved in ways that contradict the principles that they espouse, if they behaved in ways that neither Moses nor Jesus nor Mohammed would recognize. He understood that much of hate is actually driven by fear, and he listened deeply to the fears that underlie hate, and he spoke powerfully to address those fears. Now, hate is most often directed at the stranger, and no fewer than 36 references to caring for the stranger are found in the Hebrew scriptures. There's only one reference to loving thy neighbor. That's because it's easy to love your neighbor, someone who's like you. But Mark devoted his career to building bridges among strangers.
Thank you, Georgette. That really actually lays out a roadmap for so much of our discussion this evening. And so, Catherine, you were raised in Kentucky. So what was it that your parents and their friends and the community in which you were raised, religious and otherwise, what was it that was planted and nourished in you that drives you to your life's work now?
Thanks, Peter, and so great to be with all of you and also to see friends among you who are with us tonight. Great to see familiar faces. Yes, I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, and I think that the work that I'm doing now and the work of Auburn as we try to build a multi-faith, multiracial democracy where all belong, the seeds of that vision for our world were planted in my childhood with parents who had grown up in the segregated South, who had seen violence, racial violence in their hometown near Wilmington, and had then moved to Louisville, Kentucky. And my father was a professor of Hebrew scriptures and Hebrew in a Presbyterian seminary. They took that sensibility about racial justice with them, were involved in civil rights, took me with them on marches as a child. We ended up in church, black churches singing hymns after marching. And that coupled with the friendship of neighbors, Jewish neighbors next door, Max and Ruth Goldberg, who were like parents to me. And going to Germany when I was 9 years old on sabbatical and being exposed to the history of the Holocaust through going to a memorial to the victims of the Holocaust with my father at age 9. That was a very, had a deep impression. And I was also exposed there to the life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor who had been a part of the resistance movement to Hitler. So the idea and the values of finding, to Georgette's point, shared values, the idea of religion being about justice for all, and a religion not being kept within the walls of a congregation, but out in the public square, that it had something to do with how you live your life and how we shape our public life together. All of those were things that I learned early on from my parents.
Rather an extraordinary background, and so much of what they did is obviously in you. So Daisy, you have been a stalwart representative of the Muslim community, building bridges and reaching your hands out beyond the boundaries and building bridges along the way. So how and why did you come to make this your life work? And what if the fundamental, second question, what are the fundamental truths to which you hold on? The things that drive you now?
Yeah, well, great conversation, and thank you. And everybody who's out there Zooming at 7:30, thank you for attending. Rabbi, I was blessed to have been born in what was, when I was growing up, a paradise on earth called Kashmir. And although I was born in a Muslim family, I was sent to a Christian missionary school for 11 years. And so I always tell my Christian friends, hey, I did the Lord's Prayer more times than you did, probably 3,000 times in my life. My teachers were Hindu. I climbed trees with Sikh girls, bought fresh water pearls from Buddhists, and we were always told that Kashmiris were from the lost 10th tribe of Israel. So although I'd never met a Jewish person in my life until then, at the age of 15, when I landed in America, I wound up in Jericho, New York, a 99% Jewish neighborhood. So I felt that my religious education was hence completed. I was an architectural designer for Fortune 500 companies until 9/11 happened. And I had to go do an outreach. And I went to this little church in Princeton, New Jersey, in a basement to speak to a group of senior citizens. And there was a little old lady who asked me that very profound question about Muslim women. And I rattled off all the rights, proudly rattled off all the rights that Muslim women had received since 7th century Arabia. And because she was in her 80s, she said to me, I believe you, dear, but can you please explain to me why things that are happening to women in Afghanistan are happening in the name of your religion? And then she asked me that life-altering question that only can be divine intervention, in my opinion, is a question of, and what are you doing about it? And that question really stayed with me for a couple of years. And I began to think I was the most, I was educated by every man in my family. And, I am living in the most powerful country in the world. I am de facto an empowered Muslim woman. And if I'm not doing anything about it, then who will? And looking at my community post 9/11 and moved by the religious and cultural diversity that had characterized my childhood, I began to use my experience for the benefit of others and literally started building bridges the way I understood it. And I learned a couple of really important things, that when you do sincere dialogue, and I'm speaking to people here that have been engaged in sincere dialogue, and we know what that results in, we can forge personal bonds and relationships of trust that go a long way for all of us. We can not only open our hearts to one another as human beings, but deepen our quest for enduring truth. And by transcending our superficial divisions, which we all have, helps us to learn to embrace the diversity which enriches our human life. So I learned very quickly that when conflict arises in the name of religion, strong voices like ours have to characterize the conflict for what it is and distance religion from it. So in conclusion, there are a lot of things I'm working on right now, Peter, because we have to distance religion from the kind of atrocities that are taking place in its name. So women in Afghanistan are suffering because people with outdated attitudes are denying women the very rights that they have received in 7th century Arabia. So I'm publishing a book very shortly called 30 Rights of Muslim Women, making it very clear that women have these rights. And with the rise of white supremacy here in the United States that we are being confronted with, I'm publishing a little booklet, which is examining this rise of white supremacy, why it's happening, what's motivating these groups, who they are, and how they actually weaponize Christianity. And I'm passionate about it because for me, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they're all part of the same family. So when my religion is being weaponized, it hurts me just as much to see another religion being weaponized, because of course we should have said we had to turn off our phones. Sorry. So so the work I'm doing is basically trying to spread a lot of knowledge about these issues, about these social issues, and educate the public, re-educate the public, because I think that we need to have real sincere conversations to bring those who are vulnerable and misled to the center by healing them from their traumas and by the kinds of things they might be suffering. And I think that it's time for us to have sincere conversations with people that we disagree with.
So I'm so grateful to the three of you for laying out, in fact, as I hoped you would, a roadmap for our discussion tonight. And in fact, Daisy, the question that woman, that elderly woman asked of you, what are you going to do about it, is actually a question that we're going to each have to address for ourselves. And hopefully we'll do somewhat of that this evening. But now that I've been very systematic in calling each of you, knowing each of you as well as I do, I know you'll have no problem without my direction jumping in and answering the questions, and of course talking to each other. So this is not the first era of divisiveness through which we have, as a country, as a nation, have lived. What in your mind makes this different? And what in terms of what can we do about it? I mean, why is it so different from any other divisive era through which we've lived? Certainly those of us who grew up in the 60s, not many of you did. Why is this different? You don't have to raise your hand. And Georgette, if you want to talk, just unmute yourself.
I'm not sure that it really is that different, Peter. We're seeing a confluence of three great hatreds: anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and the persecution of Christians combined with xenophobia. I'm not sure that there's anything very new about that. If you look at history in the US, you see that we have had a number of great religious awakenings, probably a couple of them in each century. And each one of those great awakenings was triggered by a period of immigration, widespread immigration, and threats to the existing white Protestant power structure. So I'm not sure that this is so different, because again, we are in a period where there is widespread immigration, changing demographics, multiculturalism, and that's a threat to those who are not comfortable with pluralism.
Yeah, Catherine.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna take issue a little bit, because I do think that this is a very this is a different time. I think that there is an urgency about this moment. There is a rise of authoritarianism and cover for authoritarianism that has not been true before. There is a moment of racial reckoning where issues of, as some people call it, America's original sin of racism, where that is being uncovered in new ways, which is painful, and also a moment of great opportunity. So I think that, and the fact that oppressive forces and authoritarian forces in this country are being aided and abetted by those in power. So I think this is a perilous sort of moment where democracy is on the line and where there are narratives, competing narratives and visions of what this country will be like for the future. And so that's why I think it's so important for people of faith and moral courage to speak out and to act, and to not let this moment go by. I don't think and it's not my desire that we go back to what some of us consider normal. I think it's really important to be awake, to be vigilant, and to do what each of us can do in our own spaces to make a difference in this moment. So I think it's a very urgent and perilous time. I have a lot of hope. We can get to the hope thing later, but this is new. This is a new moment for us.
I think the politics are new, Catherine. I agree with you about that. Absolutely. And the importance of the moment, yes, but the hate is not new.
True.
The hate is very predictable
True.
Based on our history.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes.
several times you have used the word weaponization, mostly in terms of religion, but certainly in this country, it's also been race, it's been political power, and so on. But when we talk about the weaponization of religion, we perceive religion as a vehicle for peace and not enmity. What has made it so? And one other question that I hope you loop in is, what's the difference between religion and faith, or don't you think there is a difference?
That little question. Jaycee, do you want to jump in, or should we keep going a little minute here?
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in a little bit because I agree with both Catherine and Georgette that hate is the same. It's a human nature issue, but I tend to also agree with Catherine that this situation is a little bit more dire because it is universal. So extremism, the way we understand it now, meaning going to the other extreme where you're willing to use violence, is becoming a global phenomena. And the most powerful nation on the face of this earth, which is a democracy, is actually joining forces with the entire globe now. And it's perfectly okay for people here to join into and be part of that chorus. So at the very root, all of these extremist ideologies emphasize the human need to form the in and the out group for the protection and the survival of a certain group, while the other groups are painted as dehumanizing and therefore, justifying that it's okay to kill them and to commit violence. And these similarities can exist in these extremist groups across time periods, which we have seen in history, across religions, ethnicities, and nationalities. And I'm very close to some of the hot spots where this is happening. So that's why I see similar patterns between these groups. So here in the United States, first we saw ISIS. Then in the United States, we've seen the white supremacy groups. In India, we've seen the Hindutva groups. In Myanmar, we've seen the Buddhist groups. And everybody is against another group of people. And usually they're minorities. And the in-group thinks that they have lost something, that, somehow they have to give up something, or the out group, which is the minority group, is taking over. And it's the same language, the same set of grievances, only couched in different symbols, different religions, and the enemies can vary from group to group. But the white supremacist group, number one enemy are the Jews, number two are Muslims, number three are immigrants, and number four are Blacks. And they hate us all. And then they also dislike white people like Catherine. Catherine, you can join forces with us. They have no time for you. But basically, they think that, that somehow they are on the losing end of the stick. And so therefore they have to fight for their survival and fight for the survival of the Western civilization, which they couch as Christian Western civilization. So, excuse me, sorry. Oh, God.
We're being called to prayer.
Yeah.
Very, very apt, very apt.
God is intervening again.
Yes.
Um,
There's forces of the spirit at work here.
yeah. So what I was saying was that all of them believe that there is a cosmic significance to their actions, and that individuals who undertake that on behalf of the group are doing something that has moral authority because God's on their side, and they're doing something for the good of their group. So that's why they have so much support. And then, to Catherine's point, it's like these wildfires that go around all over the world, and we wonder how they got started. It's always a spark. And I always tell people, you need a spark to start hate. I mean, hate is there. It's usually latent, but somebody has to come and spark it. And we have a president right now who's sparking it everywhere, and he's giving ammunition to people to come out and say whatever they want to say, do whatever they want to do, think however they want to think. And it's very dangerous because we are the most powerful nation on the face of this earth. And if it catches on here, it catches on everywhere else in the world.
So yeah, go ahead. Was that you, Catherine?
It was. I want to pick up on something here and go back to what Georgette began with around Rabbi Tannenbaum's legacy, which really caught me because you began with non-ideological, but also he was not a purist. And I think that right now, one of the things that incites hatred is the idea of purity politics or purity faith, where you have to agree, and there's a litmus test, down the line, whether it's politics or religion, and sometimes it's a combination of both. And I think that this giving up this idea that you have to do it my way, or we cannot be in dialogue or act together, or build coalitions together. This is a danger on the left and on the right, and it's a danger in this polarized country that we're living in now. And whoever wins this election, we will still have to live together in this country in one way or another. And so this idea of purity is a dangerous one.
So one of the things
I'd like to pick.
Yeah, go ahead, Georgette. I see the floor.
You don't stand a chance, Peter.
I'm fine. This could be the easiest discussion I ever moderated.
Not with this trio. I'd like to pick up on that theme because I think there is a mechanism at work, and it has to do with group narcissism. The idea that one's own group holds the monopoly on truth. Because once you start thinking that way, you get into apocalyptic thinking, in which you divide the world into the children of light and the children of darkness. This was actually a very persistent theme in Marx's thinking. And once you've divided the world into the children of light and the children of darkness, it becomes very easy to dehumanize the other. First with language, and there is a continuum from weaponization of language, which also involves weaponization of religion. That's one way to weaponize it. Weaponization of language through atrocity. First, you dehumanize the other, and then it's very easy to commit, to incite violence. Now, hate speech and incitement are legally distinct from each other, but hate speech is the prelude to incitement, and incitement is the prelude to hate crimes and to atrocity. Now, the criminal justice system can only step in after a hate crime has been committed, can only deal with the consequences instead of with prevention. So it's very important that we set up early warning systems when we see language being weaponized, because the earlier one intervenes, the more likely one is to succeed in terms of cutting that off before verbal violence becomes physical violence.
So I have a question which is probably incorrect, but without necessarily weaponizing hate, is it ever allowable for a person, an individual, to hate?
I would say that that it's a human characteristic, but it's not. And I would call hate sinful out of my Christian tradition. Yeah, I think that hate is something that human beings need to guard against with all of the powers within us. And try to it's a reality, but love is something that we really need to cling to.
I think
I think it's really in the context of the politics of this country that some people are feeling that without necessarily acting on it, but really not loving at all.
I think that it's something, I mean, if we were going to talk about what we need to be doing right now, I think that confronting hate within oneself is a very good place to start. Yeah. Particularly now, because I don't know about you, but all I have to do is watch television, watch a news show, or read a Facebook post, and I can feel all of those feelings of disgust, dismissal, dislike, certainly, and you could say hatred, bordering on hatred. So yeah, I think confronting hate within oneself is a very good place to start, and then in communities, and then globally, to Daisy's point of our exporting of hatred. Yeah. In lots of different ways.
So do you think that the building of coalitions and transcending boundaries is more important now than ever? And along with that question, what are your particular organizations doing about that?
So I'd like to start with actually picking up from where Catherine left off. And there's a beautiful story about the prophet, how he exemplified what you do with hate. There was this woman who used to always throw garbage at him. And like Georgette said, hate really stems from fear of the unknown, fear of the other, or fear that the other person is about to take something from you. So this woman feared that he was coming up with this new message of the one God, and it was somehow going to change all of Meccan society. And she would throw garbage at him every time he would walk by this alleyway. Literally, that's how much she hated him. And one day, it became very routine. So he would duck. He knew when to duck, how to duck. And when we're talking about garbage, we're talking about human entrails. And then finally, one day there was no garbage. And so he asked his companions, he said, what happened to her? Where is she? He said, we don't know. So the next day there was no garbage. So he said, why don't you inquire? So she was sick. And he said, I'm going to go visit her. And he went and he visited her. And she was so moved by that action. She said, Muhammad, you're a good man. I didn't realize this. I'll become a Muslim. Now I'll become your follower. So this is a story we often tell and teach people on how to confront hate by just understanding that person and showing that love, because it's transformative. And this is the work that those of us who are dialoguers and people of the middle way that really believe in human goodness can do this. So Peter, to your point, what are we doing? So, I created these little booklets so I could create mass education. So we have a booklet coming out, Wise Up to White Supremacy, re-educating the public, not because I want to confront them, but because I really want to understand their angst, and I want to reach out to them, and I want to reach out to other people who don't know why these groups are, vulnerable, what is making them join this, what is making them feel sidelined. That is the level that we have to work at the grassroots level and go in deep, because the hate is not going to stop. Otherwise, it's going to keep spreading, because it's like an infection. It just keeps infecting the next person.
I'd like to pick up on what Daisy said. I recently had the opportunity to hear a former white supremacist who was talking about what it was that attracted him to that movement and how identity became entwined with ideology. And I think what he said was very, very revealing. He said, "They made me feel powerful when I felt powerless. They made me feel visible when I felt invisible. They gave me community when I felt alone." And when he was asked about, well, what is the antidote? How do you counter this attraction to a hate-filled movement? He said, well, you have to use curious listening.
Yeah.
It's the kind of deep listening I was referring to when I mentioned Mark in my opening remarks. You have to hear their grievances. And I think that also goes to what Daisy was saying, that you have to understand what's going on with the hater and the fear that's behind it in order to be able to address it. And if one is fortunate to deprogram it. That doesn't mean that we have to excuse what they do, because excusing is very different from understanding. And I think it's important to keep a bright line between those two.
Catherine, what is Auburn doing in this matter?
Some of the work that we're doing is called Being in Relationship, which is it's a theme through a lot of our work, and has certainly been true in our multi-faith work, building coalitions. And we do that in lots of different ways through our senior fellows, which are some of the prophets of our time: Christian, Jews, Muslims, Sikhs, Buddhists, but the story that came in my mind, to your point, Georgette, about listening, was a relationship that I developed a number of years ago with the Reverend Rob Shank, who was a lobbyist and very involved in the anti-abortion movement, and somebody with whom I would not, evangelical Christian would not be somebody that I would normally relate to. But he showed up at Auburn, and long story short, I decided that he'd be somebody that I could talk to. And so I went to visit him in his office across from the Capitol in Washington. We did find that there were things that we could talk about. We actually prayed together, which is not something that I would necessarily normally do in somebody's office. It mattered to him. Later, he told me that I prayed in Jesus' name. As a Christian, that was a bonding moment. But our relationship led to his becoming a protagonist in this film, The Armor of Light, that I commend to all of you, about his journey moving from that very fundamentalist Christian space to looking at the issue of guns, this intimate relationship of God and guns in some parts of the evangelical world. And so he has become now really a messenger to conservative Christians about the problematic of God and guns in our culture, and has kind of moved away from what I would call a kind of toxic Christianity. So to the point of listening, to the point of being more curious and understanding of where people are coming from. And I think we're going to have to exercise that muscle a whole lot coming up shortly. Or we're going to stay in a very polarized place as a nation.
Yeah, Catherine, as you talked, I was thinking about what I read in the Confronting Hate book about Mark Tannenbaum and how he overcame his enmity towards Billy Graham, which was, an evangelical Christian on the absolute opposite side of him, and how he cultivated that relationship and how they became such close enough friends that they would speak about each other with beyond acceptance, but really love. So I want to, I'm aware of, I want to get into some practical issues, and I'm going to ask two questions, and each of you certainly take time, although I'm aware of the clock, and answering it. Firstly, do you think people on opposing sides of the political spectrum can discuss politics with comity and mutual trust? And if so, what does it take? And the second question, which I think is in some way related, is in confronting hate, what are the actions any of us can take in the coming weeks and beyond? Georgette?
So on the matter of people at opposite ends of the political spectrum being able to be civilized with each other, I'll again circle back to one of my opening remarks, which is we have to first get over this notion that the other is evil, rather than somebody who just happens to hold an opposing point of view. Because these days we approach each other as if the other were evil. So that's number one. In terms of the religion-related hatred, I think it's very important to promote religious literacy so that we can understand those who we fear and do a reality check on those fears. I think on a practical level, I would cite one of the organizations, Daisy and I both sit on the national board of MJAC, the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council. This is an example of coalition that has identified a project with clear boundaries and clear outcomes around which they could make common cause, and that's the issue of hate crimes. And so they were able to work together as Jews and Muslims to actually succeed in getting a piece of legislation that dealt with hate crimes. The Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding has a countering extremism program. And I'd like to give one example, sorry to go back a couple of steps, in terms of how enemies can get together and get very important things done. The Multi-Faith Alliance for Syrian Refugees, one of the most successful achievements of theirs is that they got Syrians and Israelis, sworn enemies, to rise above politics and mutual suspicion and hatred to form partnerships and work together on behalf of Syrian war victims. Now, that's a very practical thing that resulted in more than $150 million worth of aid being distributed, and also planting the seeds for stability in the region.
Oh, okay. I want to make sure you're finished. I want to, Catherine, do you have some thoughts about these questions, and then Daisy?
Yeah, I think that, you asked Peter, what should people be doing now? I started out with saying that, that we live out our faith and our values in the public square. So obviously voting is very important, and getting everybody around you to vote. I think that it's really important to meditate on what it means that we're all made equally in the image of God. That is that's a tenet of our faiths that we share. And if we really took that seriously, we'd have a very different kind of world. So that's coming at it from a religious traditional sort of space. I think the other thing is, it's so easy right now to get into a hopeless place. And so it's really important to meditate on the vision of the world that you're longing for. and to be in that conversation with the people around you. So it's having a vision of a future and talking about the vision of the future that you're longing for, because I think that actually is a place where even people who disagree maybe about political issues or policy or whatever, if you get people talking about the world that they're really longing for, there's often a connection, a spark, a shared understanding, because in some ways human beings want some of the same kinds of things.
And how would you start that conversation?
I would ask, well, holidays are coming up, and they will be different, but we'll probably be on Zoom with our families just like this. So a good place to start would be, what's the world that you're dreaming of? What's the world you want to leave your children and grandchildren? Get people to talk about what that looks like, because it becomes, I've done this, we've done it in a lot of Auburn programs, and it's just a great place. People like to sink into this place of talking about their vision, their vision of the future.
Daisy, thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I'll also go a little deeper spiritually, because, we are people of faith, and, Muslims believe that all of us are created with the spark of the divine. Literally, the breath of the divine is what gives us our divinity, our humanity, and our human dignity. So recognizing that in everybody, creates that sort of that eye of the divine, where you get to see from a very different perspective. In other words, you can be compassionate towards the person, because in the limited time that I have been doing work on extremism and meeting people in prisons, there's always a broken person beneath all this. There's a person that probably has some serious trauma, some family disaffliction, relational issues, psychological issues, mental issues. It can be a range of things. So there's not any one silver bullet that is going to fix the problem. And as Georgette mentioned, when she was listening to the white supremacists, it's a whole series of reasons why people join these groups, primarily out of loneliness, or they need a holding hand. So I'm speaking from a little bit of experience, because currently there was a young girl who was in jail for aiding ISIS, and I was asked to come in from the public defender because we had published a book on this issue, to see if you might be able to rehabilitate her. And it didn't take very long, because the reasons why she had joined them, she was mostly an online recruiter, was because of personal reasons. She wanted to go there to join them, to be married, to have a family, to have a job, and to have some dignity. And so she was not an ideologue, but her reasons were personal. And that's why we can't treat everybody the same way, because a lot of times people can be healed very quickly if we just understand their issues might be personal. And now she's out of jail. She potentially could have been in jail for 60 years had she not received this kind of rehabilitative, intervention. And then she's out right now. And, under my mentorship, literally, she can call me any time of the day, whenever she has an issue. She has a lifeline, somebody to speak to. And it's literally boils down to this. Some of these people join these groups because they want to be in companionship with other people. They are yearning for respect. They're yearning for family. They're yearning for love.
What I hear is, and then I'm going to ask a question that's been sent to us, is how important relationships are with, or developing relationships with those who are not of your group and are not of your opinion. And that, of course, means stretching a bit. And in a certain way, I think this question might lead us into, or lead each of you into giving some guidance on that. The question is, what has given each of you strength, hope, comfort, inspiration with all that is happening in the world right now? And I would ask you if there's one one line from your own tradition, from your own prayer book, from your own scripture that you would say to yourself when you feel that ire welling up within you,
Yeah.
what would that be?
I would actually turn to the Hebrew scriptures, which we share, and I would go to Isaiah 58, which I think you read, Peter, on Yom Kippur, right?
Yes. What are the verses?
Yeah. Well, the verse, it's the last part of that text, and it's about, is this the
The
fact
sacrifice.
this that you pursue, to do justice
Right.
and to love kindness, and but it ends up, you shall be called repairers of the breach, restorers of streets to live in. I think this is one of the most important texts because it tells us that a relationship with God, with the divine, is related to, intimately related and impossible without how we relate to other people. And then it takes it into the public square, that we're to be repairers of the breach and restorers of streets to live in. And I think for me right now, that text is all about repairing breaches with people who may hate us or whom we might tend to other. And it's also repairing breaches in the sense of making good on the promises that we have made about equality and equity in our country, but have never fully realized, particularly to people, to black and brown people, and repairing things like economic inequality. So I would go to that. That's one of my most important texts, and I hope everybody will go home and read it.
Well, in a certain way, of course, that becomes a symbol of the repair of the world. And when we talk about Tikkun Olam,
right.
it is really actually putting creation back together again.
Exactly.
So,
And bringing heaven to earth. Yes.
So
yes,
I would go to a different one. Catherine, the text you cited is very broad and is actually the core value of Judaism, Tikkun Olam.
Of course.
But since we're talking about confronting hate, and because I deeply believe that hate and hate-inspired violence begins with speech, the text that I would go to is that ruining somebody's reputation is akin to murder in the Jewish tradition, because that is the precept that goes directly to the concept of hate speech. Because what begins with speech can in fact end with murder. That's not what the text is trying to say. It's saying something about how difficult it is to restore a reputation. And that's why it's akin to murder, because like death, it can be irreversible. But I'm giving a more literal spin to it.
but I think it's actually accurate that when you destroy a reputation, you're actually taking away the soul of a person. Daisy, thoughts?
Yeah, so there is a verse in the Quran that says, "O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes so you may know one another. And of course, the most noble of you is in sight of God is the most righteous of you." So this is a verse that many Muslims use to understand that diversity is a part of the divine plan, and that it is our obligation to get to know people who are different than us. Because in those days, 7th century Arabia, one tribe against another, that was like a different land, And so it's an invitation to deepen our understanding of different people. And through that understanding, when we do dialogue, I remember when I started doing dialogue and we started talking about different set of beliefs that we had, whether we believe in Jesus's divinity or not, and these subtle differences that we had, those dialogues actually wound up enriching my own faith, because by dialoguing with somebody else, not only was I able to get a more broader, comprehensive understanding of God's plan, but also enriched my own understanding of my own faith. So, yeah, the Quran definitely encourages us to not only understand diversity, pluralism, but to celebrate it.
So I'm going to ask one final question, which has been sent in. And the reason I'm going to push us a little beyond our time limit is because I think this is a delicious question that I look forward to hearing the answer to. And then I'm going to, after that, you answer that question briefly, I'm going to complete this, bring us to a conclusion with something that Mark Tannenbaum said. So the question is this. It seems that places, and actually talking about how wonderful the three of you are, it seems that places where women leaders are, where there are with women, places with women leaders are doing the best with our current challenges. What strengths and leadership traits do women and girls have that have come to light during this time?
Wow.
Yeah, go ahead.
Perfect.
Who is brave enough?
Well, okay, I'll I'll try to dive in with an incomplete answer. I think women tend to be more collaborative than men in a non-competitive way, which is why women are such great peacemakers. Although unfortunately they're so often sidelined and not recognized in terms of their peacemaking activities. I think women also are much more able to multitask. And you need to be able to multitask to do this work. You need to be able to hold conflicting ideas in your head at the same time.
Multiple truths.
Yes, I like that. Yeah, I like the way you've put it. That's a much better way to put it. You need to be able to hold multiple truths. And that's terribly important in this kind of work. So I'm going to stop there because I know that Catherine and Daisy will also have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, I think I would pick up on those too. I think that holding complexity and ambiguity is a very important leadership trait, particularly in this moment that some are calling an axial age, where the contours of the future are completely unclear. And if you, to Georgette's point of multitasking, if you have to, and I'm seeing this so much with mothers, in particular parents, but mothers in particular right now, and we're reading about it in this COVID moment, where you're trying to work a job, homeschool children, keep your family safe. I mean, all of these things that happen in the microcosm of a family that are happening in community and in the country more broadly and globally. I mean, holding complexity is very important. And I think women have had to learn how to do that really well.
And it also means giving up the idea that you can have complete control over everything.
Completely. There is great humility in the work of multitasking.
Daisy?
Yeah.
You know, I work with a lot of women all over the globe, and I'm amazed that we are not in more leadership positions than we need to be, because honestly, if we were, we would not have half the problems in the world. So I'm not only speaking about the three of us that are here, because I know how hard we all work, but I also know that this is a trait that is shared by women all over the world, no matter what locale they're in. They are selfless, they are humble, they do their work humbly, they walk the earth humbly. They are willing to elevate others. They put, they do not command. They empathize with people. They're willing to change. They're willing to reach out across the aisle. They're willing to listen when necessary. And I think this is the reason why, we are the glue that hold the family together, the community together, and society together. And the fact that we've not gotten recognition for this incredible trait that we have of being peace builders and resolving conflict is a tragedy. And I'm speaking because right now I'm working in Afghanistan with my partners there, and it's at the peace table which the US is negotiating, there's the whole, you've seen the army of men with long beards and turbans, and there's a handful of women. They're like token women. And yet I know the women in Afghanistan, how much they can contribute to the improvement and the betterment of the society. It's tragic. We need to take women more seriously, because we don't want to just be leaders. We want to just fix the world. And if it takes leadership, then so be it.
So I want to thank the three of you. I am so humbled and honored always to be in your presence and to hear really the brilliance with which you have spoken this evening. But I'd like to conclude, and I see Josh Tannenbaum is listening in, and if in fact that's the Josh Tannenbaum, that's Georgette and Mark's son, I would dedicate this last citation to him.
It is he.
Okay, so in 1977, upon Mark Tannenbaum's suggestion, the American Jewish Committee, for which he worked, invited Billy Graham to receive their National Interreligious Award. In prepared remarks, which Mark Tannenbaum usually did not do or prepare remarks, he reflected and said, "I have tried to devote my life to seeking to uproot the poisonous weeds of misunderstanding, prejudice, and bigotry between Christians and Jews, and I would add, and Muslims, and to try to plant seeds that might flower in time into mutual respect, friendship, and even love and caring for each other. It has not always been easy or a smooth course to follow." But I would add, but he did follow that path, and God willing, we will as well, especially in the days and weeks that are coming. So thank you all for being part of this conversation. Let's hold hands, link arms, and get on with life. We have a job to do. God willing, we'll do it together.